Dread it, run from it, destiny arrives all the same. It's Barbenheimer! Get your custom-made t-shirts and drive jackets to experience a double feature of two films that couldn't be more different. For those of you who aren't aware, and if you're watching this video, I take it there aren't many of you, Universal Studios and Warner Brothers decided to drop two major summer films, Greta Gerwig's Barbie and Christopher Nolan's Oppenheimer, on the same day. A phenomenon that's never happened at all before. Personally, I think that this whole thing happened because of the clash between Nolan and WB regarding their pandemic movie schedule. But in any event, movie fans everywhere quickly took to the interweb to share an abundance of memes and jokes to build this as a massive cinematic event. And as an up-and-coming YouTuber myself, please like and subscribe by the way, I thought it would be great to participate in the meme and do a double feature review extravaganza, much at the expense of my sleep schedule for the next 24 hours. Anyway, let's start things off with Barbie. Now, Barbie is actually the second movie that I watched in the double feature. I originally wanted to film this whole review in an out-of-order sequence, much like a Nolan movie. But after thinking about it for more than 30 seconds, yeah, I'll just do them separately. Anyway, I was pretty excited for Barbie from the word go. Greta Gerwig is a phenomenal director, and all of the casting decisions across the board were a no-brainer to me. You can't find a better choice for a live-action Barbie than Margot Robbie. And of course, Ryan Gosling is a national treasure. It's so refreshing that Ryan Gosling has moved away from the more typical leading man type role to do more off-the-wall weirdo stuff like this. He's also literally me. The story finds Barbie going through an existential crisis of sorts, leading to her once perfect world now seemingly falling into disarray. She's now faced with numerous troubles, from failing to float down from her dream house to getting flat feet, in a series of shots that are sure to make Quentin Tarantino go bananas. With her trusty Ken by her side, the live-action doll embarks on a meta quest of self-discovery, where she will encounter some consequential revelations about the real world and her origins. Starting off with the positives, the production design on display here is terrific. Sarah Greenwood's work to flesh out Barbie World is a pure cinematic delight, and everything from the costumes to the little details and everyday items all felt silly but in a tangible way. The first 30 minutes of Barbie was such a delight, seeing the entire place brought to life with such vibrancy. The trailers have also done a good job at hiding what the actual plot is. I was going in imagining this would just be a more grown-up version of the Lego movie, and I ended up getting a little bit more than that. The movie shows clear inspiration from such works as The Truman Show, Cat in the Hat, and Pleasantville, all the while feeling fresh. And of course, the entire cast is great. Issa Rae, American Ferrera, Kate McKinnon, you can tell they're all having fun in their roles. Margot Robbie adds a lot of depth to the character of Barbie. And after a streak of projects that were less than successful, I'm glad she gets another chance to prove why she's a movie star. The role is a tightrope act that demands a hefty amount of emotional weight while also still fitting into the more comedic tone of the movie, but Robbie handled that dynamic brilliantly. And Ryan Gosling. Oh boy. Not to reveal too much about my reaction to Oppenheimer yet, but my thoughts on this year's Best Supporting Actor winner definitely changed upon seeing this man bring the Kenergy. I swear, every line that came out of this man's mouth was comedic gold, and it had my entire theater dying. The role as written felt a tad one note, but the power of Gosling is able to take that one note and compose an entire symphony. Yeah, I'm gonna leave that into the review. I said earlier that Greta Gerwig is one of the best directors working today, and I meant it. Her direction is full of energy, and it makes up for a script that doesn't seem to be pulling the same amount of weight. Because unfortunately, I had several big issues with the way the film went about telling its story. I had assumed there would be a message here. I mean, you don't get Greta Gerwig to direct a freaking movie about Barbie and not expect any kind of commentary. I just found the way it delivered its message to be rather clunky, even if there was merit to the points being brought up. There's been a lot of discourse online currently about reacting poorly to a new show or movie that tries to do social commentary, and I think it's possible for you to be in agreement with the filmmaker while still pointing out shortcomings in their work. And there were a few points where the film stopped dead in its tracks so characters could deliver ham-fisted lectures about the themes. Some of these characters felt inconsistent from scene to scene as well, particularly a pair of mother and daughter characters. It makes sense why they're there on paper, but the execution of their storyline felt rather superfluous, and they end up getting lost in the shuffle of things. And speaking of superfluous, Will Ferrell comes off like an afterthought. His brand of humor has never really worked for me, and all of his scenes were forced and added an unnecessary amount of baggage to a script that already had enough conflict in it. Really, everything that involved the human world felt unnecessary. It's also weird because there seemed to be no tonal distinction between the two realities. Barbie world is silly, and in contrast, our realm should be more grounded. Yet everyone is still acting like a cartoon caricature in the real world. In fact, all the office workers at the Mattel company feel more over the top than any of the doll characters did. The movie regains its footing once it heads back to Barbie world, but it never fully recovers. And the way it chose to resolve the conflicts felt a bit counterintuitive. I brought up the comparison to Pleasantville earlier, and if you've ever seen that movie, then you definitely notice the similarities between the two movies' plots. Much like Barbie, Pleasantville is all about the sensibilities of one world creeping into another. But by the end, both realities learn from each other and become better off as a result. Here, the realities revert back to the status quo without anything being learned. I get that it's part of Gerwig's overall message, but when the social commentary of a film starts to hinder delivering a satisfying narrative, that's when you start running into problems. But overall, I'd still say this flick was pretty entertaining. I found myself laughing regularly, even if there were a few jokes that fell flat. There's big issues with its script, but the cast and production value bring an ample amount of enjoyment. If anything, I'd recommend seeing this thing just to observe its originality, since the whole movie feels like a pink fever dream, with a dash of Ken thrown in for good measure. I give Barbie a C+. It's far from perfect, but it was a much-needed source of levity after the first movie I'd watched that evening. And now we go from bombshells to, bombs, I guess. Oppenheimer is Christopher Nolan's latest film, an adaptation of the novel American Prometheus, God, that's such a cool title, which tells the story of J. Robert Oppenheimer. Cillian Murphy plays the titular character, and we largely experience the movie's events through his expressive eyes. We see, in typical Nolan fashion, a sequence of events that chronicles the building of America's first atomic bomb and the political aftermath of its detonation. The movie has an all-star cast, including Robert Downey Jr., Matt Damon, Emily Blunt, Kenneth Branagh, Josh Peck, Florence Pugh. Basically, if I listed the entire movie's cast, this video would be as long as the film itself. Christopher Nolan has reached such a level in his career that actors will show up to fulfill any role given, even if it's just for one scene. But this movie belongs to Cillian Murphy from start to finish. This thing lives and dies by him, but not only did he meet those expectations, he knocked them clear out of the park. Now let me begin by saying that I have a rather complicated relationship with Christopher Nolan. On one hand, he's a true craftsman who puts considerable care into each project he tackles. Such films as The Prestige and Inception are two works of art, and The Dark Knight is still my favorite comic book movie, period. Yet his more recent works, including Dunkirk, Tenet, and Interstellar, didn't quite hit the mark for me. Even if there are a bunch of great technical qualities to be found in them, they just didn't seem to gel as nicely as his earlier movies did. But I can't deny that no other director brings butts to the seats like Nolan can. And this brings us nicely along to Oppenheimer, which serves as Nolan's most character-driven production yet. All of his previous projects have required a high level of ambition, from reshaping the general public's view of a comic book icon to crossing the very nature of space and time itself. Here, we are asked to take an objective look at a man who has brought the possibility of global annihilation to our doorstep. We all go into this story with our own personal views, it's hard not to, but the events in his life are presented quite plainly, and we see how conflicted Oppenheimer really was. Cillian Murphy does a masterful job at conveying this, mostly by just the way his eyes express emotion. Nolan's typical problem with exposition is turned way down here, as a simple look on Oppenheimer's face does a lot to convey the tone of a scene. The way he interacts with the other people in the film is also a highlight. Matt Damon gives gravitas to his general character, a role that if played incorrectly could run the risk of coming off as a stereotypical drill sergeant. It's also great to see Josh Hartnett in a movie again. He has a lot of charisma as an actor, and he plays off of Murphy's morally flexible scientist well. But it's Robert Downey Jr. who truly shines here. I'm going to be honest and say that after about 10 minutes, I completely forgot it was him and just got caught up in his performance. It's no secret that this man probably has enough Marvel money to buy a small country. He realistically doesn't have to work anymore, yet he completely dominates every scene he's in. I'm gonna be real with you guys. I am far from a science whiz. I'm kind of a dum-dum. But the way these scenes of experimentation and government maneuvering are directed had me absolutely riveted from start to finish. And of course, the technical aspects are mostly fantastic. It's been said that Nolan didn't use a single CGI shot in the entire film, which is just absolutely wild. But regardless, it looks brilliant, with large sweeping frontier vistas and Senate committee boardrooms both being presented with the same amount of cinematic weight. The score by Ludwig is another high point as well. While I do miss the director's collaborations with Hans Zimmer, I'd be okay if he and Ludwig worked together consistently from now on. Now, I said that the technical aspects were mostly brilliant, and I say that because Nolan's usual issues with sound mixing and aspect ratios are back, unfortunately. I don't know why someone hasn't talked to him about the way he combines dialogue and other audio, but there's a solid 20% of this film that I just couldn't hear. Which sucks because its entire narrative relies on dialogue. And the constant aspect ratio changes are starting to get on my nerves, especially when it occurs from shot to shot with seemingly no rhyme or reason. But unarguably, my biggest problem with Oppenheimer is its editing and pacing in the first act. Like Memento and Dunkirk, this movie chooses to showcase its plot events in a non-linear fashion. Its opening 45 minutes bounce around from scene to scene to scene as if someone is sitting on the remote's fast-forward button. Remember how Tenet would show characters having the same conversation across several locations? Yeah, imagine that technique stretched across a whole movie. It ends up working well overall, but that opening chunk felt like I was caught up in a Tasmanian devil whirlwind. So you're sitting there watching it, and it's like, yes, the great scientist Dr. Oppenheimer. I've read up on your work. Yes, my work. I trust it's satisfactory. But of course, have you met Kitty? She's a wonderful guest, and is married to Dr. Brown. Well, she was, old chap, but now we're to be married next Monday. Next Monday, you say, but that's when the first bomb test is. It'll be alright. In fact, we've already had 2 kids. Bomb tests went well, by the way. Oh, well, I've no doubt have more tests planned. Rest assured, they've been scheduled, and I've moved my wife and kids into a small settlement we've been building. It's just slow down. Now, after the first act, it does fall into a more steady rhythm. It just takes a while to settle in. It's also worth noting that the movie is called Oppenheimer, and not The Atomic Bomb or Trinity. I'm hearing some complaints from people who were dissatisfied with the lack of explosions, which, is just a sad statement. The story is about the man, not the bomb. We see his early beginnings, his involvement in the project, and the fallout of its creation. The entire third act is essentially his moral character being put on trial, and I was absolutely hooked. 60 minutes just flew by as Nolan directs the heck out of these testimonial sequences. And by the time we get to the conclusion, I left feeling absolutely terrified. The prospect of all-out nuclear war is a chilling thing to think about. And the questions being asked here still have me caught in a deep existential dread as I edit this review. If the goal was to put us in Oppenheimer's mentality, then I consider it to be a job well done. I give Oppenheimer an A-. So overall, I had a lot of fun doing this double feature review, even if it was due to some corporate feud occurring behind the scenes. I've been checking up on the box office numbers, and it appears that both movies are doing quite well. I don't know, man. It just feels great to see people excited about going back to the movies, especially after the dull slate of blockbusters we've been stuck with. The theater was packed, with a bunch of movie fans wearing custom t-shirts and using Barbie Corvette popcorn containers. The point of movies are to bring us together, so as a cinematic event, I give Barbenheimer an A+.